Hey guys, tonight we're wandering back to the Roman Empire, and let me warn you right now, if you think you wouldn't. Tea lasts a day in medieval times. Just wait until you see what life was like in the back alleys of ancient Rome. It's noisy, it's crowded, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Especially if you've got a sensitive nose. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. An ID. Love it if you left a comment with your location and your local time right now, so we can see just how far across the world this little nighttime community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the sound of voices, echoing off stone walls. The light isn't warm or gentle, no golden sunrise, no birdsong, no crisp sheets. Instead, you're inside a cramped insula, one of those tall Roman apartment blocks where the walls are thin, the ceilings drip dust, and the neighbors never stop arguing. A baby cries. 2 rooms over, someone's arguing about bread prices on the stairwell. And below, in the street, a donkey brays, loud enough to make you wince. The air smells of everything at once. Stale wine, baking bread, sweat, cheap olive oil, and, let's be honest, a little bit of sewage. Rome wasn't exactly built with air fresheners in mind. You stumble out of bed, well, more like a straw-stuffed mattress that has been flattened into a sad pancake can. Splash your face with whatever water is left in a clay jug. Congratulations, you're awake. And this is where you realize that daily life in ancient Rome isn't all gleaming marble and white togas like the movies promised. It's noisy, dirty, and alive in a way that feels exhausting from the moment you open your eyes. As you shuffle to the window and peek down, the city is already buzzing. Hawkers shout about fish and olives. Bakers are pulling blackened loaves out of communal ovens. And just a few blocks away, you can already spot figures that look a little too painted, a little too polished for this early in the morning. They're leaning against doorways, tossing glances at passing men, making sure their jewelry catches the light. These are the women and sometimes men whose hobbies and tea exactly recorded in Rome's official history books, but whose presence was everywhere. R is your first historical fact of the night. The Roman city of Pompeii had at least 25 known brothels for a population of about 12,000 people. That's 1 brothel for every 480 citizens, practically Starbucks levels of coverage. And yes, you're going to walk past them today. But first, let's finish getting you oriented. You slip into sandals that already feel like they've given up. Tie your simple tunic at the waist and step out into the sunlight. The streets are uneven cobblestones, and you have to dodge puddles of who knows what, not to mention carts and impatient goats. Every sense is on high alert. The taste of ash from nearby cooking fires lingers in your mouth, your ears buzzed with the chaos of a city bursting at the seams. As you wander toward the markets, you notice how close everyone is crammed together. The insulae rise high on both sides, balconies leaning dangerously. Laundry hangs above like makeshift flags. And everywhere, painted signs and graffiti remind you what people wanted most: food, wine, politics, and, of course, pleasure. One odd detail that scholars like to mention: prostitutes in Rome often wore toga-style outfits, which was unusual because respectable Roman women didn't wear togas. So, ironically, the garment you imagine senators strutting around in also doubled as a kind of neon sign for sex work. Think of it as the ancient version of a uniform, except made of scratchy wool. Now here's where the day really begins. Because while everyone else is lining up for bread or gossiping about the latest gladiator match, some people are scanning the streets for entertainment. And you, walking along the Via della Bandanzur. Some similar bustling. Roman street are about to see how deeply the world's oldest profession is woven into the fabric of daily life. You glance left, and a tavern door creaks open. Inside, the smell of cheap wine hits you. A woman in smeared makeup leans on the counter, laughing at a joke she's heard 1,000 times. Her laugh is raspy, practiced. She glances your way not because you're special, but because everyone is a potential customer. You move on quickly, maybe blushing, maybe curious, but you don't stop. The crowd pushes you forward, past stalls selling dates and figs, past a barber scraping someone's chin with a terrifyingly dull blade, and toward an alley where the noise changes. Less suiting, more whispers. And this is where you first sense it. The divide between Rome's official, respectable life and its shadow life. A senator might thunder in the forum about morals and discipline, but the same man might sneak down these alleys at dusk, looking for someone to keep him company. Scholars still argue whether Roman society was truly tolerant of prostitution, or whether it was more of a tolerated shame, a necessary evil brushed under the marble rug. But for now, in this moment, it's just another part of the morning scene. The women, some young, some older, are setting themselves up for the day, adjusting their hair, arranging their clothes, leaning on doorposts with that mixture of boredom and practiced allure. For them, this isn't history. It's just the workday beginning. You stand there, trying not to stare, trying to blend in, but you know you're an outsider. Your sandals pinch, your stomach growls. And yet, already, you've stumbled into a world that feels strangely familiar. After all, the city's heartbeat is still commerce, still survival, still people doing whatever they have to do to get by. And in Rome, that meant that while you were looking for breakfast, someone else was already negotiating the oldest deal in the book. Hey guys, tonight we're wandering back to the Roman Empire, and let me warn you right now, if you think you wouldn't. Tea lasts the day in medieval times. Just wait until you see what life was like in the back alleys of ancient Rome. It's noisy, it's crowded, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, especially if you've got a sensitive nose. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you left a comment with your location and your local time right now, so we can see just how far across the world this little nighttime community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wait to the sound of voices echoing off stone walls. The light isn't warm or gentle, no golden sunrise, no birdsong, no crisp sheets. Instead, you're inside a cramped insula, one of those tall Roman apartment blocks where the walls are thin, the ceiling's drip dust, and the neighbors never stop arguing. A baby cries, 2 rooms over. Someone's arguing about bread prices on the stairwell, and below, in the street, a donkey brays loud enough to make you wince. The air smells of everything at once. Stale wine, baking bread, sweat, cheap olive oil, and, let's be honest, a little bit of sewage. Rome wasn't exactly built with air fresheners in mind. You stumble out of bed, well, more like a straw-stuffed mattress that's been flattened into a sad pancake hand. Splash your face with whatever water is left in a clay jug. Congratulations, you're awake. And this is where you realize that daily life in ancient Rome, ISNT, all gleaming marble and white togas, like the movies promised. It's noisy, dirty, and alive in a way that feels exhausting from the moment you open your eyes. As you shuffle to the window and peek down, the city is already buzzing. Hawkers shout about fish and olives. Bakers are pulling blackened loaves out of communal ovens. And just a few blocks away, you can already spot figures that look a little too painted, a little too polished for this early in the morning. They're leaning against doorways, tossing glances at passing men, making sure their jewelry catches the light. These are the women and sometimes men, whose hob isn't exactly recorded in Rome as official history books, but whose presence was everywhere. Ere as your first historical fact of the night. The Roman city of Pompeii had at least 25 known brothels for a population of about 12,000 people. That's one brothel for every 480 citizens, practically Starbucks levels of coverage. And yes, you're going to walk past them today. But first, let's finish getting you oriented. You slip into sandals that already feel like they've given up. Tie your simple tunic at the waist, and step out into the sunlight. The streets are uneven cobblestones, and you have to dodge puddles of who knows what, not to mention carts and impatient goats. Every sense is on high alert. The taste of ash from nearby cooking fires lingers in your mouth, your ears buzzed with the chaos of a city bursting at the seams. As you wander toward the markets, you notice how close everyone is crammed together. The insulae rise high on both sides, balconies leaning dangerously. Laundry hangs above like makeshift flags, and everywhere, painted signs and graffiti remind you what people wanted most. Food, wine, politics, and, of course, pleasure. One odd detail that scholars like to mention. Prostitutes in Rome often wore toga-style outfits, which was unusual because respectable Roman women didn't wear togas. So, ironically, the garment you imagine senators strutting around in also doubled as a kind of neon sign for sex work. Think of it as the ancient version of a uniform, except made of scratchy wool. Now, here's where the day really begins. Because while everyone else is lining up for bread or gossiping about the latest gladiator match, some people are scanning the streets for entertainment. And you, walking along the Via della Bandanzur. Some similar bustling. Roma street are about to see how deeply the world's oldest profession is woven into the fabric of daily life. You glance left, and a tavern door creaks open. Inside, the smell of cheap wine hits you. A woman in smeared makeup leans on the counter, laughing at a joke she's heard 1,000 times. Her laugh is raspy, practiced. She glances your way not because you're special, but because everyone is a potential customer. You move on quickly, maybe blushing, maybe curious, but you don't stop. The crowd pushes you forward, past stalls selling dates and figs, past a barber scraping someone's chin with a terrifyingly dull blade, and toward an alley where the noise changes. Less suiting, more whispers. And this is where you first sense it. The divide between Rome's official, respectable life and its shadow life. A senator might thunder in the forum about morals and discipline, but the same man might sneak down these alleys at dusk, looking for someone to keep him company. Scholars still argue whether Roman society was truly tolerant of prostitution, or whether it was more of a tolerated shame, a necessary evil brushed under the marble rug. But for now, in this moment, it's just another part of the morning scene. The women, some young, some older, are setting themselves up for the day, adjusting their hair, arranging their clothes, leaning on doorposts with that mixture of boredom and practiced allure. For them, this isn't history. It's just the workday beginning. You stand there, trying not to stare, trying to blend in, but you know you're an outsider. Your sandals pinch, your stomach growls. And yet, already, you've stumbled into a world that feels strangely familiar. After all, the city's heartbeat is still commerce, still survival, still people doing whatever they have to do to get by. And in Rome, that meant that while you were looking for breakfast, someone else was already negotiating the oldest deal in the book. You step deeper into the waking city, your feet carrying you from the cramped Insula district toward the wider, louder avenues. The sun is climbing, and Rome is already buzzing with a rhythm that feels endless, like the city itself never truly sleeps. Every turn of the street brings you face with new smells, new sights, new layers of human life stacked on top of each other. At first, it feels almost exciting. Merchants shouting about honeyed nuts, slaves balancing amphorae on their shoulders, children chasing each other through puddles. But then you notice the subtler corners, the little nooks, where a different kind of business thrives. These aren't the polished colonnades or marble forums you see in history books. These are the streets of vice and commerce, where transactions are quieter, more private, and more desperate. You wander past a wine shop, its doorway marked with painted vines, and just next to it is another door, darker and unmarked, where figures lean casually, scanning the crowd. A woman draped in a faded toga adjusts the strap of her sandal, flashing you a glance. That's half invitation, half calculation. Behind her, faint laughter drifts out of a shadowy room, mixed with the smell of lamp oil and sweat. Rome was like this. Respectable trade next to taverns, taverns next to brothels, brothels next to bakeries. Everything was layered, interwoven, impossible to untangle. And this is the moment you realize how normal it all was. To the locals, presence of prostitutes in the streets wasn't scandalit, was sinori. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. In ancient Rome, prostitution was not illegal. In fact, prostitutes could register with the... Imagine filling out your tax form and writing profession. Prostitute, in neat Latin script. Bureaucracy waits for no one, not even the world's oldest trade. But of course, not every worker played by the rules. Many skip the registration, hiding from the tax collectors, slipping into taverns and alleys. Instead, that's where you're wandering now, where the lines blur between inn, bar, and brothel. The odd, quirky detail here. Some Roman taverns actually marked their walls with carved or painted phalluses pointing the way to the nearest brothel. Not exactly subtle signage. You imagine tourists, backed in merchants from Gaul, or soldiers from the frontier stumbling into the city. Following these cheerful stone arrows like ancient neon lights, you pause by one such wall, the carved symbol catching your eye, and follow where it leads. The alley narrows, shadows lengthen, and the chatter of the main street fades. Here, the commerce is quieter, but no less alive. Bonjour left, the door cracks open and a man slips out, pulling his cloak tightly around him. He avoids your gaze, muttering something about being late. Moments later, a woman leans against a frame, lips curved in a practiced smile. She calls softly to the next passerby, her voice low, almost musical. You move past your sandals scraping against uneven stone, and you realize how diverse the clientele must be. Soldiers on leave, foreign traders, even freedmen looking to escape the grind of daily labor. The city's appetite was endless, and the supply met it in every form and price range. And scholars still argue whether this street-level visibility meant that Roman society was more permissive, or whether it was simply too vast and chaotic to control. Some argue that Rome embraced prostitution as part of its moral economy, while others insist it was tolerated but despised, a contradiction that played out in every glance, every whispered deal. For you, wandering these alleys, the contradiction is clear. Respectable matrons in white stolas hurry past, shielding their eyes. Men in fine cloaks glance sideways but never slow down, never acknowledge. Yet, just steps away, doors creak open, laughter spills out, coins clink onto counters. It's a reminder that cities don't run only on bread and circuses. They run on desire. On the quiet acknowledgement that everyone has needs and someone else is always willing to meet them for a price. The deeper you walk, the more you notice the layering of this city. Brothels tucked behind taverns. Taverns tucked behind market stalls. Market stalls selling perfumes and garlands that will inevitably end up in the same rooms where lamps flicker and clients whisper. The streets themselves are a web, pulling everyone in, and as the sunlight shifts, glinting off tiles and worn marble, you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched not by one person, but by the whole city. Every corner hides a transaction. Every door is an invitation or a trap. By the time you step back out into the wider street, you feel like you've seen both halves of Rome at once. The respectable city of trade and religion, and the shadow city where desire is just another commodity, and the line between them is as thin as a toga's hem. The city surges forward, pulling you along, and you realize this is only the beginning of your Roman day. By now the streets are fully alive, and you're swept into the current of Rome's day. You can almost forget the shadowy alleys you just passed until you see how quickly those two worlds collide. The bakers are selling bread, the butchers are hacking at cuts of meat, and right beside them, the prostitutes are already at work. Yes, already. Unlike your 9-to-5 job, there's no office bell that signals a start here. The workday begins whenever there's a customer willing to pay, which means dawn isn't too early. Some clients want a quick visit before heading to the forum or to the baths. Others sneak in after a night of drinking. So, while respectable citizens are queuing for fresh loaves, prostitutes are straightening their hair, adjusting their clothes, and leaning in doorways, hoping to catch a glance that promises business. You pause at a street corner, and it's impossible not to notice. One woman chews a sprig of fennel to freshen her breath. Another adjusts the thin wool toga wrapped around her body, shifting it so her shoulder is exposed deliberately, provocatively. A younger girl plats her hair with cheap ribbons, trying to look a little more elegant than hers. Each is performing a role, rehearsed countless times, because survival depends on attracting attention. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Rome, prostitutes were legally forbidden from wearing the stola, the long gown that respectable matrons wore. Instead, They had to wear the toga garment associated with men, scandal, and, in this case, sex work. So from the moment a woman dressed herself in the morning, her profession was literally stitched into her clothing. Everyone knew who she was before she said a word, and you can feel how heavy that must have been. No anonymity, no hiding, just a garment that shouted her status louder than her voice ever could. As you watch, the rhythm of their day starts to take shape. Some of the women linger outside taverns, chatting with men who sip wine even though it's barely mid. Others wait by bathhouses, knowing that flushed, relaxed customers coming out might be easier to persuade. And then there are the ones who don't stand in doorways at all, they wonder. Weaving through the crowd, their gaze sharp, scanning faces like hawks. It's a performance of availability, but also of endurance. Every smile, every laugh, every toss of the hair is calculated. Too little effort, and you go hungry. Too much, and you risk angering someone powerful. It's a dangerous balance, and you can feel the tension of it just walking past. Here is the odd detail. Some prostitutes actually carried small oil lamps with carved erotic scenes on them. Imagine that, holding a little clay lamp decorated with acrobatic lovers. Basically a handheld advertisement glowing in the dusk. If that doesn't count as ancient marketing, nothing does. And yet, the deeper you look, the sadder it feels. Because you notice how quickly the mask slips when the customers walk away. The painted smile fades. The shoulders sag. The eyes glance at the ground. It's a job, yes, but it's also a performance that wears down the performer. You follow one woman, keeping your distance. She greets a passing man. They exchange a few words, and she leads him inside a narrow doorway. The door shuts. Minutes later, she's back, straightening her toga, already scanning the street for the next one. That's the rhythm. Client, room, coin, repeat, all day. No weekends, no time off, just the constant cycle of performing, pleasing, and surviving. And scholars still argue whether Roman prostitutes had any real autonomy in this cycle. Some suggest many were enslaved, owned by brothel keepers or pimps who took most of their earnings. Others argue there was a spectrum. Some women were forced. Yes, but others chose the trade, seeking independence in a society that gave them few options. The truth, like the streets of Rome, is probably tangled somewhere in between. As the morning heats up, you notice that the prostitutes start shifting locations. Those near the markets drift toward taverns. Those at taverns slip toward the bath. It's almost like they know exactly where the crowds will flow, and they move with it, following the current like fish in a river. And the sound of it, all the footsteps, the bargaining, the laughter, the muttered promises starts to blur into background noise. You realize that for Romans, this wasn't shocking. It wasn't hidden. It was simply part of the landscape, as normal as bakers selling bread or barbers cutting hair. Which makes you wonder, how would you fare here? Could you stand in that doorway all day, repeating the same performance over and over, hoping each glance turns into a coin? Or would you crumble under the weight of it, under the stares, the whispers, the constant reminder that you're both essential and despised? The day is just beginning, and already you feel the exhaustion of it. Rome doesn't give you time to rest. You step aside to let a cart pass, your sandals slipping on the uneven stones. And you know the rhythm of this city won't stop, not for you, not for anyone. The prostitutes straighten their togas, adjust their ribbon and smile again. The workday has only just begun. By now, the sun is high enough to bake the stone walls around you, and the city feels like it's vibrating with heat and noise. Bread sellers call out their last loaves before lunch. Water sellers clang their bronze cups. And from somewhere down the street comes the sharp clash of hammers from a blacksmith's forge. You follow the flow of the crowd toward one of the most infamous places in Roman history. Even the name is revealing. Lupa in Latin meant both chivalf and slang for prostitute. So when you hear Lupena, think then of wolves. Not exactly subtle branding. The building itself doesn't stand out at first. 2 stories, plain brick, with small, narrow windows that keep secrets better than curtains. But the closer you get, the more the atmosphere shifts. The crowd grows quieter here. Not silent, but different, more cautious. Men glance around before ducking in, cloaks drawn. A couple of soldiers laugh too loudly, trying to cover their nerves. You step inside, and the smell hits you first. Oil lamps, smoke, sweat, and wine all swirl together in a thick cloud. The rooms are small, cramped, barely big enough for the rough brick beds inside them. And yes, you heard that right, beds made of stone, covered with thin straw mats. Comfort wasn't part of the package. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Lupena of Pompeii, one of the most famous brothels uncovered by archaeologists, had 10 rooms and was decorated with erotic frescoes above the doorways. These paintings served 2 purposes: to titillate and to act like a menu, showing potential customers what kind of services were available. You stand in the dim hallway and look up. The frescoes are still vivid in your mind's eye. Painted couples in every possible arrangement. A silent guidebook of desire. For the clients, it was entertainment. For the workers, it was advertisement. And here's the odd detail that makes you pause. Those frescoes weren't just for fun. Scholars suggest they helped overcome language barriers. Rome was a melting pot of slaves and foreigners: Greeks, Syrians, Egyptians, many of whom didn't speak Latin. A painting of 2 lovers was universal shorthand. No words required. As you wander deeper into the Lupena, you feel the claustrophobia of it. Narrow halls, low ceilings, flickering lamps. The air is damp, heavy with whispers and muffled laughter. In one room, a curtain flutters as someone slips out, adjusting their belt. In another, a woman sits on a brick bed, braiding her hair with bored precision, waiting for the next client. This is where the day truly unfolds for prostitutes. Outside, they catch customers. Inside, they perform, rest, repeat. There's no privacy, no glamour, just a relentless cycle of transactions. The stone walls echo with footsteps, with coins clinking, with doors creaking open and shut. And you can't help but wonder what it felt like for the workers themselves. Did they numb themselves to it, treating every encounter as just another task? Did they whisper jokes to each other in the hall, finding tiny pockets of humanity between clients? Or did the walls themselves press down, the weight of knowing this was their world, day in and day out? Scholars still argue about the conditions. Some say the Lupana was regulated, kept reasonably safe by Roman standards. Others insist it was brutal, with women treated as little more than property, their earnings taken by pimps or brothel keepers. The truth, as always, likely shifts depending on who you were, where you worked, and how much you cost. Because make no mistake, there was a hierarchy. Even here, some women worked in these cramped, smoky rooms for the lowest rates imaginable. Others catered to wealthier clients in more comfortable houses, with softer beds and finer wine. But the Lupina, the wolf's den, was the base level, the rawest form of the trade. You run your fingers along the rough brick wall, tracing grooves left by centuries of hands. The floor beneath your sandals is sticky, worn smooth by countless feet. The reality of it sinks in, not the romance of history, not the glamour of toga clad senators, but the grit of everyday life in an empire that prided itself on power yet relied on this hidden economy. A group of men pass you, laughing too loudly, the sound bouncing harshly off the stone. You step aside, and the hallway grows quiet again. A door creaks. A woman emerges, adjusting her toga, her expression unreadable. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't look at anyone. She just drifts back to her room, waiting for the next knock. You realize then that in Rome, pleasure was business, and business was survival. And in places like this, the line between living and merely existing was as thin as the curtain that separates one room from the next. The day stretches on. The lamps burn low, and the Lupaner hums with its steady rhythm. Inside these walls, history feels less like marble and more like flesh and stone. By the time you step back into the sunlight, blinking against the glare, you can't help noticing how uneven this world really is. The Lupena was crowded, cramped, filled with women who looked tired before noon. But just a few streets away, there's another side to the trade, one that whispers of silk, perfume, and conversations held in candlelight. This is the divide between the cheap prostitutes and the elite courtesans. And you're about to see both. On your left, A woman leans against a tavern door, her toga little more than a scrap of fabric. She calls to every man who passes. Her voice rough, her laugh even rougher. She doesn't choose her clients. They choose her, and they choose her because she's quick, cheap, and available. For a handful of bronze coins, you're in and out before your wine cup cools. Mainstream historical fact. The cheapest prostitutes in Rome could charge as little as 1 quadranza coin, worth less than a loaf of bread. Imagine offering yourself for the price of a crust. That's what survival looked like at the bottom rung. And then you turn a corner, and the contrast hits you. A litter carried on the shoulders of slaves pauses. Outside a domus, a wealthy townhouse. From within, a woman steps down, draped not in rough wool, but in fine linen, scented with imported myrrh. Her hair is piled high with jeweled pins, her eyes lined with expensive kohl. She isn't leaning on a doorway calling to strangers. She's being escorted to a private dinner, where her presence alone is entertainment. These were the elite courtesans, sometimes called meretrices Anastasia, honorable prostitutes. The label was ironic, of course, but it pointed to their elevated status. They weren't hanging around taverns or loot. They were keeping company with senators, generals, and poets. Odd detail, some of these courtesans could recite poetry, play instruments, and debate philosophy. They weren't just bodies for hire, they were performers, companions, conversation partners. In a city obsessed with status, they could mingle in high society in ways no tavern girl ever could. But don't be fooled into thinking it was glamorous. Even the courtesans lived at the mercy of men's whims. Their beauty, their charm, their with it, all had an expiration date, and while they might enjoy silk sheets today, tomorrow they could be cast aside for someone younger, fresher, more amusing. You walk a little further, and the two worlds overlap in strange ways. Outside the baths, a line of cheap prostitutes waits for soldiers to emerge. But across the street, a wealthy merchant's carriage rolls past, carrying a courtesan draped in purple-dyed fabric worth more than a laborer's yearly wages. Both women are selling the same thing, yet their experiences couldn't be more different. One counts every copper coin. The other waits for gifts of land, jewelry, or even houses from wealthy lovers. Both are trapped in roles the city defines for them. Scholars still argue about whether these courtesans had real influence. Some believe they shaped politics from the shadows, whispering in the ears of powerful men. Others dismiss that as exaggeration, insisting they were ornaments, not strategists. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Invisible influence woven into silk sheets. As you wander back toward the forum, you can't help comparing the two images burned into your mind. The woman at the tavern door, exhausted but relentless, scraping together enough coins to eat. The courtesan in silk, stepping gracefully into a carriage, her perfume lingering in the air long after she's gone. It makes you wonder, if you had to live in Rome, which life would you choose? The raw honesty of poverty, where survival meant exposing yourself on a street corner, or the gilded cage of privilege, where luxury came with strings tied to powerful men who could cut them at any moment. Neither choice feels like freedom, but both are stitched into the fabric of Rome, as essential to the city as its aqueducts and amphitheaters. The sun tilts westward. Shadows stretch across the cobbles, and as you walk away, you realize you've just seen two sides of the same coin. One rough, one polished. Both bought and sold. As the afternoon deepens, you notice a rhythm pulsing through the city. Not music, not footsteps, something more intimate. Rome itself seems to breathe in cycles of pleasure and performance, and the prostitutes you've been shadowing are part of it. You slip into the shadow of a colonnade and watch as a group of men stream out of the baths, their skin glowing with oil and sweat. Waiting for them are women leaning against walls, hair-tousled eyes scanning the crowd like hawks, searching for prey. Their hands brush against arms, tugging at sleeves, murmuring invitations you can't quite catch. It's a game of subtlety and boldness all at once. Flirtation stripped of any pretense of romance. Mainstream historical fact. The baths of Caracalla could host up to 1,600 bathers at once, making them a hunting ground not just for merchants and gossip, But for prostitutes seeking clients, imagine stepping into a space where nakedness was normal, where bodies gleamed under torchlight, and where a whispered suggestion could turn into a transaction within minutes. But it wasn't just about standing outside the baths. Some women worked inside taverns, pouring wine as much as themselves. Others worked in circuses and theaters, blurring the line between entertainment and sex work. The city was their stage, and they learned how to read their audience. Here's an odd detail for you. Some prostitutes carried little lamps or wore brightly colored shoes so men could spot them in dim alleyways. It's like Rome had its own primitive version of neon signs, flickering in the dark. You think of how, today, flashing lights and subtle codes still guide people toward forbidden corners of nightlife. Apparently, human nature doesn't change much. You trail one woman through a crowded street as she drifts from group to group. Her smile shifts like a mask suite when she wants to lure, sharp when she's ignored, mocking when she senses rejection. She doesn't need words to sell herself. She sells through presence, through the tilt of her hip, the way her fingers graze the air, just enough to spark imagination. Scholars still argue whether this constant public availability diminished the idea of privacy in Roman sexuality. Was it simply practical commerce in a crowded city? Or was there something deliberately performative about it, like the whole population was in on the act? Either way, Rome didn't keep its pleasures hidden. It flaunted them in alleys, taverns, even temples when no priest was looking. You'd duck into a tavern now, curious to see how the dynamic shifts indoors. The air is thick with wine fumes, laughter, and the sharp tang of cheap fish sauce. A group of soldiers crowd around a wooden table, pounding their cups. A woman balances a tray, pouring wine into their cups, leaning just a little too close, letting her arm brush against a shoulder. They laugh louder, toss coins onto the table, and before long, one of them pulls her onto his lap. You sit in the corner, watching the routine. The flirtation isn't accidental, it's strategy. The laugh, the touch, the way she refills cups, just when thirst peaks, it's all carefully timed. Flirtation is survival. Another detail. Prostitutes in Rome sometimes wore togas instead of stolas. Why? Because the stola was a mark of a respectable married woman, while the toga, oddly enough, was linked to public women, including prostitutes. It was a garment that spoke for them before they even opened their mouths. Imagine stepping into a room and being labeled instantly by what clings to your shoulders. No words needed. By now, you realize that Rome's streets are alive with coded signals, a language of glances, gestures, and garments. You don't need to hear the words. You just need to watch how the body speaks. As the day wanes, you follow another pet, this time a courtesan being escorted into a villa. She doesn't laugh loudly or cling to sleeves. She walks with measured grace, her veil just low enough to spark curiosity. Inside, she entertained with stories, music, maybe even intellectual debate before anything physical happens. Her flirtation is layered, complex a chess game compared to the dice throwing of tavern girls. Two worlds, two strategies. One sells speed. The other sells fantasy. Both are performances, both rehearsed in their own way. And as twilight deepens, you can't help wondering if you, too, have been caught up in their act. Every glance, every smile, every shift in tone. Maybe it wasn't for the clients at all. Maybe it was for you, the invisible observer wandering Rome's streets, lulled by the timeless rhythm of seduction. By the time the lamps are being lit in the streets, you start to notice a new routine emerging. The day has its rhythm, yes, but the night. Oh, the night belongs to an entirely different tempo. And for prostitutes in Rome, the cycle was everything. They didn't live on a 9-to-5 schedule like you do. Their hours were set by the rising and falling needs of the city. Morning might bring stragglers stumbling home from taverns. Midday meant soldiers fresh from the baths. And evening was when the true crowds emerged. You realized their day wasn't measured by sundials, but by footsteps, laughter, and the rattle of coins. Mainstream historical fact. The Roman Forum and markets often stayed busy until late into the night, with taverns, bathhouses, and eateries. Drawing customers well past sunset, prostitutes positioned themselves where foot traffic guaranteed encounters. adapting their schedules to the city's pulse. You trail a young woman named Livior. At least that's what she calls herself tonight. She wakes late in the morning, washes in cold water, then slips into her toga. She ties her hair up quickly. No time for jewels or perfume, those luxuries belong to others. Her first stop is the baker's stall, where she spends yesterday's earnings on a hunk of bread. That bread isn't just food, it's fuel for another day of hustling. By noon, she's near the Circus Maximus. The races draw massive crowds, and with them come opportunities. She doesn't watch the horses. She watches the men. The excitement in the arena makes them reckless with their money. Every cheer is another chance for her to catch someone's eye. Here's an odd detail. Some prostitutes set up temporary booths near stadiums and circuses, almost like pop-up shops today. You could cheer for your favorite charioteer and then disappear behind a curtain for a quick transaction. Imagine modern sports stadiums with merch tables of an entirely different kind. After the games, Livia drifts toward the taverns. This is where she spent a bulk of her evening flirting, laughing, making herself visible. She's not selling love, she's selling presence. A reminder that pleasure is only a coin away, and if the tavern owner demands a cut of her earnings for letting her linger, she pays it. Better than being chased into the street. Scholars still argue whether prostitutes were fully integrated into Roman daily life, or whether they existed at the margins, tolerated but despised. The truth seems to be both. They were everywhere outside baths, in brothels, in taverns, at the circus, but at the same time, they were branded as infames, legally dishonored. Rome couldn't live without them, yet it pretended they weren't respectable. As the night stretches deeper, the rhythm shifts. Now come the wealthier clients, the ones who want a courtesan to accompany them to private dinners. You peek into a villa where a gathering is underway. Reclining on couches, men sip wine as a courtesan sings to the strum of a lyre. Her voice is soft, her laughter timed perfectly. It's less about sex, more about performance. But make no mistake, sex hovers at the edge of every verse, a promise behind every smile. Meanwhile, in a cramped lupanar, other women work relentlessly, one man after another. Their cycle is brutal. Entertain, negotiate, perform, collect. No time for music or poetry. Just repetition. By dawn, their bodies ache, their purses heavy or empty depending on the night's luck. The cycle ends with collapse. Some sleep on straw mats in the brothel itself. Others stumble home through narrow alleys, clutching their coins as tightly as their dignity. And when the sun rises again, the routine begins anew. You realize their lives are measured not by years, not even by months, but by transactions. Each day I senti Tuesday or Wednesday, it is the day I earned enough to eat, or the day no one stopped to look at me. As you walk away from the tavern lights and into the quiet of a side street, it hits you. The city doesn't just breathe on its own. It inhales and exhales through the bodies of the people who keep its hidden machinery running. Prostitutes weren't an accessory to Rome, they were its heartbeat after dark. And tomorrow, the cycle will repeat, again and again, until age, illness, or fate interrupts it. The deeper into Rome's nightlife you wander, the more you begin to notice the city's obsession with rules. Not moral rules. Rome wasn't shy about pleasure, but regulations, laws, and boundaries. Even desire, it seems, had paperwork. Mainstream historical fact. Prostitutes in Rome were required to register with an official called the aedile, who kept records of their names, addresses, and the fees they charged. Imagine that, a literal catalog of sex workers maintained by the state. Rome didn't just tolerate prostitution, it administered it like a business. You pass a small office tucked near the forum, where men shuffle wax, tablets, and styluses. This is where women had to declare themselves officially. To become a prostitute, you had to stand before an aedile, state your name, your chosen profession, and sometimes even your price range. On se recordad, you were legally marked as infamous, stripped of certain rights. You couldn't testify in court. You couldn't marry into respectable families. Your name was stained, inked into public record. Odd detail. Some women lied about their age or status to register. Freed women, and even slaves, sometimes claimed new names just to get on the books. Others, forced into it, had their masters registered them like property. The system was supposed to provide order, but in reality, it was full of loopholes, tricks, and coercion. You step into a tavern now and overhear a conversation. A man laughs as he waves a wax tablet, boasting about how many names are in the register. It's like showing off a menu. The women in earshot roll their eyes. They know the reality behind those lines of ink. Registration wasn't safety yet. It was branding. Scholars still argue about how strictly these laws were enforced. Some think the registers were closely monitored, ensuring order in a sprawling city. Others suggest they were half-heartedly kept, more symbolic than functional. A way for Rome to say, "See, we're in control," even when the streets told a different story. As you keep walking, you notice another layer of regulation. Clothing. Prostitutes weren't supposed to wear the stola, the garment of a respectable married woman. Instead, they were often forced into the toga garment that screamed public woman. It's strange, isn't it? The toga, usually linked to male citizenship and dignity, was twisted into a symbol of female dishonor. Walk the streets in one, and everyone knew who you were. The more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Imagine not being able to hide, not even with your clothes. Your job isn't just something you do. It's something stamped onto your body every time you step outside. You pass by the lupanar again, and the walls remind you of another set of unspoken rules. Graffiti covers the stone advertisements, boasts, crude drawings. Some men etched reviews of the women they visited, naming names, describing acts, even rating their performances. In a way, it's like the world's first customer feedback system, carved in sharp lines for anyone to read. The women's reputations weren't their own. They were graffiti on a wall. Odd little image. One carving shows a stick figure with an oversized... well, you can guess. Beneath it, someone scrawled a name. Was Etha a joke? A cruel review? A boast? Maybe all three. It's hard not to smirk. But then the weight of it sinks in. That name belonged to someone who had no power to erase it. Walking through these streets, you realize Rome's regulations weren't about protection. They were about separation. Respectable women were placed on pedestals, protected by family honor. Prostitutes were branded, marked, written into lists, forced into clothing that screamed their role. And yet, despite all this, business thrived, because rules are not. Desire is a force that ignores boundaries. The registers could fill up with names. The walls could be etched with insults. The togas could mark women as public, but none of it stopped the trade. It makes you wonder, was the regulation really for the women, or was it for everyone else? To reassure Roman citizens that pleasure was controlled, contained, filed neatly into wax tablets, that everything had its place, even lust. As you drift further from the taverns and toward the quiet outskirts, the rules feel even more absurd. Out here, no EDO watches, no register lists, names. Women and men still find each other under the stars, exchanging coins or favors. The city can try to legislate desire, but outside its marble walls, the human heart doesn't care much for paperwork. By the time the moon is high, you're struck by the irony. Rome built aqueducts to control water, laws to control people, roads to control trade, and registers to control intimacy. And just like water, desire always found cracks to flow through. By the time you've spent a full day drifting through Rome's alleys, taverns, and brothels, you start to notice the quieter details. The things not written in wax tablets or carved into walls. What actually made up the daily grind? What did these women carry, eat, and cling to in order to survive? You pause at a stall near the forum. A woman haggles with a vendor over a strip of cheap cloth. She fingers it, shakes her head, then drops a few coins with a sigh. That cloth, it's not for fashionettes to replace a worn-out sheet in a rented room. Nothing glamorous. Nothing exotic. Just one more mundane item to keep her business running. Mainstream historical fact. Many prostitutes in Rome worked in tiny single-room chambers called celae within lupanar's bare stone spaces, just big enough for a bed or straw pallet. These weren't love nests. They were closer to closets with curtains. Imagine living your entire life in a space barely larger than a cupboard. Haute detail? Some women decorated their celae with frescoes of gods or symbols of luck, little paintings of Venus, Priapus, or Cupid. Even in a space used dozens of times a day, they carved out personal touches. A faint attempt at beauty. You picture a woman lying on straw, staring at a crude painting of Cupid, half believing it might bring a better client tomorrow. Food was another constant grind. Most prostitutes weren't feasting on olives, fish, and fresh bread like you see in movies. They ate whatever coins could buy. Thin porridge, beans, stale bread softened with wine. Some were lucky to scavenge leftovers from tavern kitchens. If they had wealthy patrons, the meals could be lavish honeyed cakes, roasted meats, exotic fruits, but for most, food was survival fuel, not indulgence. You step into a tavern kitchen and watch as a woman slips a bit of stew into a clay cup while serving soldiers. She hides it under her cloak, stealing her dinner in plain sight. Nobody calls her out, Mabi. They all know the game. And what about hygiene? Baths were everywhere in Rome, but entrance fees cost money. Cheap prostitutes often couldn't afford daily visits. They used cold water from fountains, sometimes even scraps of oil rubbed into skin to hide odors. Wealthier courtesans, of course, visited the baths regularly, their skin glowing with perfumes and oils. The contrast between soap and sweat was another marker of class within the same profession. You linger in the baths and notice another odd little image. Women scraping their skin with strigils. Those curved bronze tools used to remove oil and dirt. It's strangely intimate to watch someone essentially peel the day off their body, preparing to sell it again by nightfall. Scholars still argue whether prostitutes actually kept personal possessions of value. Some suggest they hoarded jewelry or coins for security. Others believe they rarely kept anything long-term, as pimps, tavern owners, or bad luck stripped it away. What's certain is that most lived hand to today's earnings, vanished into tomorrow's bread, wine, and rent. One object seems to surface again and again. The oil lamp. You see them everywhere, teeny clay vessels glowing with weak flame, casting shadows on stone walls. These lamps weren't just for light. They were signals. A lamp in a window could mean a woman was available. Some carved their initials into the clay, as if claiming ownership of the little flame that marked them to the world. You duck into a lupina chamber now, stooping beneath the low ceiling. A straw mattress lies on the ground, rough blankets piled in a corner. A jug of cheap wine sits half empty. A lamp flickers on a shelf. This is it. No perfume bottles, no flowing silks, no romance. Just the bare minimum to keep business moving. And yet, you sense something more. The painted Venus on the wall. The hidden scrap of jewelry under the blanket. The half-whispered prayer to Fortuna before a client arrives. Small acts of humanity in a life stripped bare by routine. As you leave the chamber, you're struck by the paradox. The richest courtesans and the poorest prostitutes lived in the same city, walked the same streets, sold the same service. But their daily lives couldn't have been further apart. One dined in villas, recited poetry under torchlight, and fell asleep on silk sheets. The other gnawed stale bread, curled on straw, and prayed the roof wouldn't leak in the night. Rome celebrated both. Rome needed both, and Rome forgot both as quickly as the lamps burned out at dawn. By now, you can almost smell the oil smoke, taste the sour wine, feel the scratch of straw on your skin. You've stepped far past marble columns and statues. You're in the real Rome now, the Rome of daily survival, small rituals, and worn-out sandals. And the truth, it's not glamorous, it's not scandalous, it's ordinary, which somehow makes it even harder to forget. The city quiets as the night deepens. But for prostitutes in Rome, quiet doesn't mean peace. This is when the darker side of the profession reveals itself, not in whispered flirtations or painted lamps, but in risks that lurk just beyond every transaction. Mainstream historical fact. Prostitutes in ancient Rome were legally classified as infames, meaning they had no legal standing and could not defend themselves in court. If they were cheated, beaten, or worse, there was little chance of justice. Their existence was tolerated, but their rights were erased. You watch as a woman argues with a drunk soldier outside a tavern. His words are slurred, his hand gripping her arm tight. She protests, tries to pull away, but when he shoves her against the wall, no one intervenes. A few men glance, shrugged, then return to their cups of wine. For her, this isn't just a bad night, it's The reminder that violence can come at any moment, and the city won't protect her. An unsettling detail. Roman laws sometimes fined pimps or brothel owners if prostitutes under their control were harmed, not out of concern for the women, but because they were considered economic assets. Imagine being valued not as a person, but as damaged property. You follow another woman as she hurries down an alley, clutching her coins. She glances over her shoulder constantly, as if shadows themselves might reach for her. Theft was common. Men knew prostitutes carried coins, and pimps demanded cuts. Safety wasn't guaranteed, even after the work was done. Scholars still argue whether prostitutes formed informal networks to protect each other. Some evidence suggests women shared lodgings or worked in pairs, warning each other of dangerous clients. Others believe survival was too competitive for solidarity. Each woman left to fend for herself. The truth is likely a messy mixed moments of sisterhood in a world that rewarded betrayal. And then there's disease. Rome's streets weren't clean. Its water wasn't pure, and its medicine wasn't exactly modern. Venereal infections spread quickly, sometimes fatally. Remedies ranged from herbs and wine-soaked cloths to charms and prayers. Some women carried amulets, etched with magical inscriptions, convinced these would protect them. Others relied on sheer luck. Odd image again. A tiny bronze phallus charm dangling from a necklace. Not just a sexual symbol, but a talisman against evil and disease. Imagine wearing the very image of what threatens you, hoping it will somehow shield you. You drift further into the city, toward the outskirts where the poor are packed into insular crowded apartment blocks of wood and stone. Fires smolder, dogs bark, children cry. Here, prostitution doesn't happen in painted chambers. It happens in stairwells, doorways, corners. Privacy isn't expected. Dignity isn't preserved. The dangers aren't just physical. Reputation itself is a kind of death. Once registered as a prostitute, a woman could never undo the stain. No matter how much she earned, no matter if she retired and bought land, the mark of infamia followed her. Respectable families wouldn't let their sons marry her. Priests wouldn't let her into sacred spaces. She became a permanent outsider. And yet, despite the dangers, the work never stopped. Why? Because hunger is louder than fear. Bread doesn't wait for dignity. Rome's economy thrived on inequality, and prostitution was one of its cruelest safety valves. You stop near a temple, or even hear on sacred ground transactions whisper in the shadows. Ironically, temples sometimes became hotspots for prostitution, despite official bans. Some even argue certain cults blurred the line between ritual and sex work. The city could never fully separate holiness from hunger. It's here, in the temple shadows, that the contradictions of Rome strike hardest. This is a city that built aqueducts, amphitheaters, roads stretching across continents. A city that prided itself on order, discipline, and law. And yet, beneath it all, countless women lived every day, one step away from violence, poverty, or disease. The truth is, you wouldn't last a day in their sandals. The fear, the stigma, the lack of protection it would grind you down before the week was out. Rome might glitter with marble, but for these women, the nights were long. The alleys dangerous, and survival was never guaranteed. And as you slip back into the lamplight, you realize the real cost of Rome's pleasures wasn't coins. It was the lives of the people who risked everything to provide them. By dawn, the city begins to stir again. Shopkeepers sweep their thresholds, bakers pull hot loaves from their ovens, and senators march toward the forum. For you, it's just another sunrise in Rome. But for the prostitutes you've been following, the day doesn't bring relief. It brings a different kind of struggle to weight a stigma. Always pressing, always present. Mainstream historical fact. Prostitutes in Rome were officially branded as infems, a legal category that stripped them of honor and basic rights. They could not testify in court, they could not inherit from respectable families, and their word carried no weight in disputes. In a city obsessed with social rank, this was like being pushed permanently to the bottom rung. You watch as a woman steps out of a brothel, her hair tied hastily, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. Men on the street glance at her. Some smirking, others sneering. They know who she is before she speaks. The toga she wears marks her as public, as outside the bounds of respectability. No amount of coins in her purse can erase that garment's silent accusation. Odd, and almost cruel, detail. In some cases, women didn't choose prostitution, they were forced into it by masters, pimps, or poverty. Yet once registered, even if coerced, the stain of dishonor stuck forever. The law didn't care about circumstances, it only cared about categories. You follow her to the market, where she buys figs and bread. The vendor takes her coin, but not without a sneer. She notices, of course, but pretends not to. That's another survival skill, pretending not to hear what everyone whispers. Scholars still argue how much everyday Romans actually despised prostitutes, versus how much disdain was a performance. Publicly, they were scorned, insulted, marked as shameful. Privately, men of every class visited them. Hypocrisy was part of the culture. Condemn them in the daylight, seek them out at night. And the double standard didn't stop there. Respectable women were shielded by layers of law and family honor. They were meant to be pure, chaste, above suspicion. Prostitutes, by contrast, were considered polluted, impure, beyond redemption. Yet both groups lived side by side in the same city, separated only by clothing, reputation, and the fragile illusion of honor. You wander past a temple of Vesta, where the Vestal Virgins, symbols of Rome's purity, keep the sacred flame burning. The contrast hits hard. On one side of the forum, Virgi celebrated for their chastity. On the other, prostitutes condemned for their lack of it. Yet both groups were trapped in roles, defined entirely by men, their value measured not by their own choices, but by what they did or didn't do with their bodies. And here, as another odd little image. Graffiti on a wall near the forum that mocks a senator for being caught with a prostitute. The shame isn't really on him, it's on her, magnified by the public record. The man might laugh it off. She'll carry the mark, forever. You start to realize that stigma wasn't just social, it was physical, written into the body. The toga, the registration, the graffiti, all marks that couldn't be shaken. Even courtesans who entertained the wealthy weren't free from Italiano. They could recite poetry, play music, dine with senators, but at the end of the day, they were still filed under the same category. Scholars still debate whether some prostitutes ever managed to rise above the stain. A few, perhaps, saved enough to retire, to buy land, to disappear into the countryside. Some became mistresses with long-term influence, even mothers of powerful men. But the law never forgot. The category clung like smoke. You watch as the woman finishes her shopping and disappears into the crowd. No one looks twice now. Sibylline, yet never fully belongs. She is part of the city, and yet apart from it, and that's the cruelest irony. Rome depended on prostitutes, just as it depended on bakers, builders, and merchants. They filled a need, kept men satisfied, upheld the illusion of respectability for good women, yet the city never thanked them, never honored them, never allowed them dignity. It makes you wonder, if you were forced into this life, would you cling to pride? Would you fight the whispers, the stares, the smirks, or would you let the roles swallow you whole, becoming what the city says you are? Either way, you wouldn't last long, because carrying stigma day after day is its own kind of violence. And in Rome, that violence was endless. Night comes again, and the rhythm resets. For a prostitute in ancient Rome, time doesn't feel like a straight line, it feels like a circle. The same tasks, the same stairs, the same choices, repeating endlessly. You can almost hear the hum of the city shifting into its nocturnal pulse. Dice clattering in taverns, laughter spilling into the alleys, sandals slapping against worn cobblestones. This time, you follow a different woman. She's younger, maybe 17, maybe 19. It is hard to tell. Life has a way of aging faces faster when there is no protection, no safety net. She's new to this world, and it shows in the way she fidgets with her tunic, how her eyes dart too much, too fast, as though still searching for a way out. Mainstream historical fact. Roman law required prostitutes to officially register with the aediles. The city magistrates, they had to declare their name, age, and the specific fee they charged. If they lied charging more than they'd listed, or hiding their trade, they could be punished, fined or even whipped. This wasn't just a business. It was a regulated, recorded institution. So imagine the humiliation of standing in line, in broad daylight, telling a magistrate, "Yes, this is who I am, and this is what I charge." Everyone in the room knows it. Everyone outside whispers it. And once it's in the records, there's no taking it back. The girl you're shadowing tonight probably went through that process recently. Her name now exists on a scroll in some dusty archive. She doesn't belong to herself anymore. She belongs to the system. Hear us, the quirky detail. Some women tried to play tricks on the system by registering under ridiculous names, jokes, even outright puns. It was a way to carve out a scrap of power, mocking the very law that bound them. Imagine if your legal identity was something like Cherry, Golden Dove, or even Don't Ask. It was dark humor in the face of unrelenting shame. But jokes only go so far. You trail her as she slips into a dimly lit tavern, the air thick with the smell of sour wine. Men lean against the walls, watching. Some call out, testing her nerves. She forces a smile, but her hands tremble as she pours drinks. As she lets one man guide her toward the back room, you can feel the weight of vulnerability pressing down. These aren't gentle encounters. These are transactions, stripped of romance, stripped of choice, and the risk is constant violence, disease, pregnancy, all hovering like shadows just out of sight. No one is there to protect her. The magistrates who took her name won't intervene. The gods won't answer. Scholars still argue whether prostitutes in Rome were seen as utterly powerless, or whether they carved out niches of control within their world. Some evidence suggests they could refuse clients, at least sometimes. Others argue that once payment exchanged hands, refusal was impossible. Either way, the imbalance of power tilted hard against them. You think back to your own time, your own comfort's privacy, autonomy, the ability to walk away. Here, that luxury doesn't exist. You realize just how short your patience would wear if you were trapped in this cycle. Market below, judged by strangers, and constantly at risk. And yet, there's a strange resilience in this girl's eyes. When she leaves the tavern hours later, coins rattling in her pouch, she looks tired. Yes, but not broken. She even stops to buy a flower from a street vendor, tucking it into her hair. Maybe it's a little rebellion. Maybe it's hope. Odd how a single bloom can look like defiance against an empire. Still, the night doesn't end with her. The streets teem with others just like her, each carrying the same invisible burden. For them, sunrise doesn't mean freedom. It means another loop in the endless circle. And for you, watching it all, walking among them, you feel the loop tugging at you, too. It's exhausting, just imagining living like this. The laws, the stigma, the rituals. Beat these points, you'd probably be desperate to escape, no matter the cost. But escape isn't really an option here. Not in Rome. Not in this life. As the night fades into pale morning light, you find yourself wandering toward the city gates, where Rome's outskirts reveal another side of the trade. Not every prostitute works in the crowded taverns or the grand brothels near the forum. Some ply their trade in the shadows of the walls, in shabby huts, or on the roadside, waiting for travelers and soldiers heading in or out of the city. The air smells different here, less of wine and more of dust, hay, and horse sweat. A few carts rattle past, their drivers yawning, their cargo covered in rough cloth. Among them stand women and a handful of boys, cloaks wrapped tight, eyes alert for opportunity. Mainstream historical fact. Roman soldiers were officially forbidden from marrying during their years of service. This meant that many relied on prostitutes and camp followers to meet their needs. While commanders turned a blind eye, the law itself pushed soldiers into these arrangements. For women, it meant a steady flow of customers whenever troops passed through. You pause beside one of the huts, where a woman greets a pair of legionaries. She's older, her face lined, her voice commanding in a way that suggests she's been at this for decades. She jokes with them first, demands payment up front, and even warns them not to get too rough. There's authority in her tone, The kind that comes from surviving long enough to set her own terms. And here, as an odd little detail, some roadside prostitutes painted their doors or used carved symbols so travelers would know what they offered without having to ask. Imagine a faded fresco of Venus, or a crude phallus carved above the threshold. It was advertising ain't. You can help but think how awkward it would be to explain if you just wanted directions. The soldiers laugh, toss her a few coins, and vanish inside. For them, it's just a quick stop on the way to their post. For her, it's survival, another small exchange that keeps bread on the table and wine in the jug. You walk further, noticing how the prostitutes here carry themselves differently from those in the city center. There's less pretense, less theater, no togas, no painted faces, just plain tunics, cloaks, and the pragmatism of those who serve men who are often too tired to care about glamour. Scholars still argue whether these women were seen as more degraded than their city counterparts, or simply as another layer of Rome's social fabric. Some argue that proximity to soldiers gave them a kind of rough protection and unspoken agreement that they were part of the military's shadow economy. Others insist they were the most vulnerable of all, unshielded by walls or institutions, left to fend for themselves. You imagine yourself in their place, standing by a dusty road at dawn, waiting for strangers. Every rustle in the bushes could be a customer or a threat. Every coin could mean food or a trap. Would you be able to live with that constant uncertainty? Or would you crumble under the tension, too wary to ever rest? One of the women offers you a fig, smiling faintly, as though to remind you that beneath the roll, there's still humanity. For a brief second, you see not a prostitute, not an infamous, but simply a woman trying to survive. That small act of kindness hits harder than any lecture in history books. And then you notice the wall behind her, scratched with graffiti. Not insults this time, but prayers. Short lines like Venus, protect me, or Fortuna, bring luck tonight. Even here, even on the margins, the divine lingers. The women seek protection in the only places left to them on the walls, in whispered words, in the hope that maybe a goddess will listen where men do not. You step back, realizing that Rome isn't just marble and triumphs. It's also the dirt roads, the hidden huts, the weary women who keep the wheels of the empire turning in ways no senator ever acknowledges. And that thought lingers. If you were trapped here, branded by law, dependent on passing strangers, forever outside respectability, how long before your spirit broke? Or would you, like the woman who gave you the fig, still find small ways to keep your humanity alive? Either way, the roadside shadows remind you. Survival in Rome came at a cost, and for prostitutes, that cost was paid daily. The sun climbs higher, burning away the morning haze. Rome bustles with its usual chaos, vendors shouting, donkeys braying, carts rumbling over uneven stones. You drift back into the city's heart, following the flow of people toward the Forum, the very center of Roman life. Here, wealth and power display themselves in marble and bronze. But even in this grand setting, prostitution is never far away. The contrast is jarring. Senators in gleaming togas stride past, their clients trailing behind. Philosophers gather to debate politics and virtue. And tucked just beyond the colonnades, you spot a discreet doorway painted with faint symbols, another brothel, hiding in plain sight, operating under the very noses of Rome's elite. Mainstream historical fact. The Emperor Caligula once imposed a tax on prostitutes, essentially turning their labor into revenue for the state. It was calculated per client, which meant every transaction technically fed the empire's coffers. Imagine the irony. Rome publicly scorned these women, yet eagerly took their money. Hypocrisy wasn't just cultural, it was financial. Inside, you notice a very different scene from the roadside huts. Here, courtesans recline on couches, draped in dyed fabrics, their hair styled in elaborate curls. They play the lute, recite verses, pour spiced wine. Their role isn't just physical, it's performative, intellectual, designed to flatter and amuse wealthy patrons. But don't be fooled by the polish. Beneath the silk, the stigma remains. The Lodo Santi distinguished between the girl in the roadside shack and the courtesan quoting poetry to a senator. Both are infames. Both carry the same legal brand, no matter how different their clientele. Here's a quirky detail. Some courtesans actually became minor celebrities, their names whispered in gossip the way we might talk about movie stars. Poets wrote verses about them, sometimes adoring, sometimes cruel. In a city obsessed with reputation, they lingered in the public imagination. Not as sequels, but as fascinating curiosities. You watch as one courtesan engages a wealthy man. Her laughter seems genuine, her wit sharp. For a moment, it almost feels like equality, but then the transaction becomes clear coins exchanged, hands guiding, the balance restored. No matter how clever, how charming, she's still bound to her role. Scholars still argue whether these courtesans had real influence, or whether their power was always an illusion. Some sources suggest they swayed senators, even nudged politics through whispered pillow talk. Others insist this is romantic fantasy, that their voices never truly mattered outside the bedroom. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Fleeting influence, never permanence. As you linger in the room, you notice another odd sight. A client scribbling on a wax tablet, calculating expenses. Yes, even in matters of lust, Romans kept accounts. He mutters about prices, taxes, obligations, as if intimacy were nothing more than a line item. And perhaps, in this society, it was you leave the brothel, stepping back into the blinding sunlight of the Forum. The grandeur of Rome towers over you, the Senate House, the temples, the monuments to victory. But all you can think about are the hidden rooms, the secret exchanges, the women whose lives are both necessary and condemned. It's exhausting, trying to hold both truths in your head. That Rome was magnificent, and that Rome was cruel. That it built empires, aqueducts, and philosophies, while also grinding countless lives into dust, unseen and unrecorded. You imagine yourself trying to endure this world, shifting from shadow to shadow, never fully accepted. Always marked, the weight of it presses on your chest, as if the marble columns themselves are leaning down. Would you rebel? Would you run? Or would you eventually surrender, folding yourself into the role society demanded? Because resistance felt too heavy, the Forum roars with life. But beneath the noise, you hear the silence of those whose stories rarely get told. Their names, their jokes, their fears all erased, except for scraps in graffiti, mentions in law codes, whispers in poetry. And yet, in walking among them tonight, you've heard their voices in your own head. The empire continues, indifferent. The Senate debates, the gods are worshipped. And still, in the margins, the prostitutes of Rome endure silent pillars, holding up the city in ways few ever admit. The day wanes, and the long Roman evening stretches out like a weary sigh. Oil lamps flicker in doorways, the scent of roasting meat drifts from kitchens, and the shadows grow longer, softer. For most Romans, this is a time to gather with family, to share bread, to trade gossip. But for prostitutes, the cycle never stops. The darker it gets, the busier their world becomes. You wander once more through the Subura, Rome's infamous district of noise and temptation. Laughter spills from taverns. Men stumble arm in arm, and shutters slam as respectable households pretend not to notice what's happening outside. The streets here are their own kind of stage, and every doorway could be a performance waiting to happen. Mainstream historical fact. Prostitutes were not allowed to wear the stolada, traditional dress of respectable Roman matrons. Instead, many were required to wear the toga, the garment normally reserved for men. This strange reversal turned clothing into punishment, a visual marker that screamed dishonor to anyone who saw it. Respectable women shielded themselves with layers of fabric. Prostitutes were stripped of that protection. The effect was psychological as much as social. Imagine being forced to wear a uniform that constantly announced your status, that shouted your shame even when you said nothing at all. The toga was heavy, itchy, cumbersome, like carrying stigma in fabric form. You can almost feel it pulling at your shoulders as you picture yourself in it. Quirky details: some women tried to bend the rules by decorating their togas with bright colors, embroidery, or even cheap jewelry. If they had to wear humiliation, they might as well make it dazzling. You can almost hear the sarcasm in their choices. Fine, call me dishonorable, but at least I'll sparkle while you do it. You trail one such woman tonight. Her toga is crimson, her hair streaked with ochre dye, her bracelets jangling loudly enough to demand attention. She's older, confident, moving with the authority of someone who knows how to control a crowd. As she struts down the street, men call out, but it's she who decides who gets her time. Power, fragile and temporary, but power nonetheless. Scholars still argue whether this visibility gave prostitutes a kind of strange fame, or whether it only deepened their humiliation. Some say the toga turned them into walking billboards, impossible to ignore. Others argue it stripped them of dignity so thoroughly that even their attempts at defiance became part of the spectacle. You pause, thinking of all the layers you've seen in the brothel rooms, the roadside huts, the courtesans, salons, the crowded taverns, each one different, each one marked by the same thread of stigma. Rome needed them. Romeus et tem, but Rome never forgave them. The woman in crimson disappears into a doorway, her laughter echoing back into the street. For her, the night is just beginning. For you, the journey is nearly at its end. You step away from the Subara, the noise fading, the lamps growing dimmer behind you. The city stretches out, vast and relentless, marble and mud interwoven. And in that silence, you realize the truth. You wouldn't last a day in their world. The laws, the shame, the endless sickle day would crush you long before you found your footing. And yet, somehow, they endured. These women, erased in history books, mocked in graffiti, Marquette Bala, still managed to carve out lives, to joke, to hope, to survive in a city that gave them nothing. That resilience, quiet and unseen, may be the most Roman quality of all. By the time you leave the streets behind, the sky has gone fully dark. The stars faint against the city's glow. Rome hums on, eternal, indifferent, and the prostitutes, juiced like the bakers, the soldiers, the slaves keep it alive, in ways no monument ever will.